Stacy Malkan is here from US Right to Know, the author of How Big Food Captured the World's Largest Public Health Nutrition Group, which is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And the subheadline here, Stacy, says a 2022 study published in Public Health Nutrition found the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a symbiotic relationship with multinational food, pharmaceutical, and agribusiness corporations, and often acts as a pro-industry voice at the expense of public health. I think a lot of people watching are probably like, no duh. So the first question I wanted to ask you, and just heads up for everybody, you can actually read the documents that we're going to be discussing at US Right to Know. So check out the links in the description. We'll have that there. But Stacey, why don't we first start with what about this would be new or surprising to people? Is it the specificity of the relationships, like how direct they really are? It's not just a hint, hint, nudge, nudge, or is it the amount of money that seems to be exchanged here? For you, what was surprising? Because I think, like I said, a lot of people would go, okay, duh. Like, if one thing we've learned over the last couple of years is that public health is captured.
Yeah, we knew, but we didn't know how bad it is really, is the finding. So the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is the largest professional organization for nutritionists, 112,000 members. So they're extremely influential with many things that we hear about health. And I think that the extent of their influence and of influence of groups like this is often not understood. So public health conferences, the education that nutritionists receive. So, what people are hearing in hospitals, the mainstream advice that we get about nutrition and what's healthy to eat, the dietary guidelines of the US. So this group is very influential in all of it. What's new with the kind of work that we do at US Right to Know is that we look at the documents that come from these groups and come from the academics and professors that they work with, the government programs that they work with. So we spend a lot of time filing public records requests and getting at documents that are often hidden from the public. So in this way, and this is a study that my colleague Gary Ruskin did. He's done now, I think, 14 academic studies based on corporate documents, public health group documents that show really how the channels of influence work, how much money, and in this case, huge amounts of money coming from junk food, soda corporations, pesticide companies to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Also, the Academy invests in junk food companies, the Academy Foundation. So that's a new finding of this study. They actually make money when these companies do well. Okay, that's a bit of a conflict of interest. And also that they have quid pro quo arrangements. So if you give us so much money, you get benefits and rights in return. So all of this adds up to a lot of the information we hear about nutrition is being subtly and not so subtly influenced by junk food corporations that are making foods that we know are harmful to health and bad for our families.
Let's look at one of the documents here so people get a feel for what they could read for themselves again. And maybe let's back up a second. We're looking at this is an email, right? What are some of the documents that people are going to be looking at? Are they mostly email exchanges? Give us a sense of what those are.
A lot of email exchanges, what people actually say behind the scenes versus what they're saying in public. So yeah, a lot of this is coming from email exchanges and also attachment documents that in some cases show sponsorship deals, or this case, they're laying out the sponsorship task force, which is looking at, what companies get for their sponsorships. And they delineate in this document, they say sponsors are different from supporters and sponsors get certain rights and benefits in return. And then the document includes, and in a lot of cases, we don't know, like what are they getting in return? What do the companies get? I think the Academy should be a lot more transparent about that. But this document includes some examples like you and I were discussing earlier. PediaSure has a program apparently with nutritionists in pediatrician's office. Yeah, so they have a self-assessment tool for physical activity. What should your family be doing for exercise? What should you be doing for nutrition? Sponsored by PediaSure. So, the advice on nutrition and exercise is filtered through company interests. They have a retailer program that they talk about here at Walmart and Target. What's that? Well, certainly these companies benefit from being associated with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which has a reputation of being, prestigious group. And as I said, it influences a lot of the very education that is received by people whose job it is at hospitals and doctors' office to give us nutrition advice.
Yeah, some of these are really interesting. Here's just a little bit of the money. This is their 2015 exhibitor sponsors. Like you were saying, they have a couple options. You can be a sponsor or you can be a donor. And when you're a sponsor, you pay a fee in return for defined specific rights and benefits. If you're a donor or grantor, it's like you give us money with no expectation of a return. And so they're talking about their sponsor status for fiscal year 16, National Dairy Council, Abbott Nutrition, which is Pediasure, right? Isn't Pediasure, right? Abbott. And it wasn't Abbott the company that had the formula issue recently?
Yeah, because they had dastardly conditions in their plant, making formula that wasn't safe. That was closed down. So yeah, Pepsi, okay.
Pepsi, right? Yeah. Unilever.
Yep.
ConAgra.
We see pesticide companies. There's an interesting example also in this document that Subway approached them for, if you go a little bit down in the document, it's got the example. Subway asked them to give basically a nutritional stamp of approval for their products.
Right.
Okay, well, it says discussion closed. It was the discussion closed because they don't do that. I mean, they used to do that. One of the things that this group, and why you mentioned, people know, and this has been made public before, and nutritionists have been complaining for years about the corporate influence at this group. But they were caught out several years ago because they decided to put an actual stamp of approval on certain products, and it was called Eat Well, a little Eat Well seal that you would see on a product in stores. And the first product that they put it on was Kraft Singles individually wrapped cheese product. I mean, it's just not even a food. It's not even cheese.
What is it?
Not a lot of flack from, I don't know, but if you try to melt it, it's not pretty. I mean, yeah.
I'm going to look it up while you're talking.
Oil. It's a vegetable oil, vegetable chemical oil.
Cheese.
They did do away with that. Though Kids Eat Right. That's what it was. It was Kids Eat Right. Okay.
It's saying Kraft Sing. Okay, I'm looking at Walmart.com right now. It's saying it is pasteurized. It's pasteurized 2% milk and no artificial flavors. That's what they're saying. Are Kraft Singles actually cheese? So it's not actually cheese, says this says the FDA calls it pasteurized processed American cheese food. In order for a food product to be a true cheese, it has to be more than half cheese, which is technically pressed curds of milk. What are Kraft Singles and Velveeta? Sorry, I'm going down this rabbit hole. I just have to.
Yeah, I have it actually on my screen here. I can show you what the actual label looked like. Now, this was in 2015, and they did get called out on it, and it was in the New York Times, and it was a minor scandal. But it just sort of goes to show, like, this is the ideal for companies. Kids Eat Right, from the American Academy, right on their package label. So, yeah. Since then, now, as I said, came out in the news. A lot of people complained. There was a lot of contrition around that, but there haven't been any actual real changes in terms of transparency or limiting corporate influence. And that's another finding of our study. Like, it just really hasn't changed that much. They're maybe not being that obvious about it, but they're doing the same sorts of things, taking huge amounts of money from junk food and soda companies, investing in some of those companies, and giving them benefits in return. And certainly the way they talk about food and nutrition is very influenced by what's good for their sponsors. So you won't hear the Academy talking about how it's a good idea to limit sugar consumption or soda consumption. They promote GMOs, for example, and then they were getting money from Monsanto.
That's interesting. Okay, so big picture, tell me the connection between this group and like public health policy, I guess, because they're not necessarily a public health organization. They're a private, they're like a company, right? It's not a government organization.
Well, a trade association, right? So
Okay.
they get involved in accreditation of certain professionals. They do conferences. One of the ways they influence policy is that they're very influential in the dietary guidelines that come out of the U.S. government, which a lot of groups have complained about for years or two. Not really that good for our health and often based on old, outdated ideas of what's good for health. So, and I think some of the most pernicious influences, again, just like and you and I talked about this earlier as well, but when you're in the doctor's office or you're in a hospital and you're getting advice from professionals that's influenced by corporations, or sometimes straight up getting products from hospitals that are coming from the corporate sponsors.
Okay, this is what I just wanted to show. This is what I found.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is legit.
Cheese.
Has cheddar cheese, skim milk, milk fat, milk protein concentrate, whey, calcium phosphate, sodium phosphate, contains less than 2% of modified food starch, salt, lactic acid, milk, annatto, paprika extract, natamycin, a natural mold inhibitor, enzymes, cheese culture, vitamin D3. So it is technically
cheese. Technically,
well,
milk.
I don't think actually. I looked up as I was reading about this while you were talking. I briefly saw something that said that it's not necessarily considered a cheese because it has to be. This has too much of some other stuff in there to be considered a full cheese. That's what I read. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, now you know. That's what's in a craft single.
Well, so this is an example of an ultra-processed food, and an ultra-processed food is one that is made in the lab from ingredients that are manufactured, not food. That are manufactured ingredients rather than actual food. So that's a definition that I found on a university website. And so ultra-processed foods are there's just so much science showing that they're not good for our health, and that eating whole foods as much as possible rather than the processed foods is what we need to do for maximum health. Mm-hmm. But companies are making a lot of money on junk food and also on food that is addictive.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about, again, the directive, not just the influence on medical practitioners, but like how this influences government policy that may make the system friendlier towards this kind of food production versus, say, like the kind of food that might be healthier for us, like from smaller farmers in our local communities, regenerative farmers, that kind of stuff, who, I'm just curious because I don't know many doctors who even know about that stuff. I mean, they'll tell you like the food pyramid still, and they may not, and I just having recently had a friend who had a baby, the doctor, so the friend wants to give the baby formula from New Zealand that's goat's milk formula, maybe a little bit better than what we're producing here in the United States, and not as good as breast milk, but maybe a better alternative. And the doctor said, I can't approve that because it's not an FDA, approved product or something like that. It was very odd. So they would rather you take like Enfamil or Similac or something, or a soy-based formula, because that's safer. Even though I don't even think the FDA approves formula. I think it's just, anyway, you go look into it. But long story short, the reason I bring this up is because doctors look to the government. It seems like, how does the government look to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics to give its advice or its policies to make it easier or harder for like the New Zealand company, or that has the goat's milk that doesn't have a bunch of soy in it, or for the local farmer here in the United States who has grass-fed cow and wants to cut you custom meat, but doesn't have the ability to go to a USDA inspection facility, all that stuff. I'm just curious, big picture on that one. But first, I want to give a heads up to a company that's not on Stacy's list. Is not giving money, as far as I know, to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, AllisonWinePromo.com. Don't forget, you can get these amazing high altitude wines again, that are not sponsoring the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. However, if you go there and you get 50% off the wine and 50% off of shipping, you can support me. And then that way I don't have to ask the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics to give me money to stay in business, right? I mean, see, you're keeping me from any cozy relationship with them. You go buy my wine, I don't have to call them up and say, hey, I need a new sponsor. Can you be my sponsor for my show? Okay. Not that I would really do that. But anyway, don't forget, if you are already drinking wine, you like Malbecs, these are amazing Malbecs. They're all from very high altitudes and very remote regions of Argentina. Fewer pesticides. The grapes work a lot harder under the sun. And these are small companies, wines you can't get at the grocery store. The Rogue Malbec you see on the left, I always say, is one of my favorite Malbecs ever. Each one of them has a unique story. The one in the middle is from almost 9,000 feet. That's an extreme altitude Malbec. That's skiing altitude. Okay. You could drink and ski up there. And then the one on the right, they use natural fermentation, zero filtration. These are just unique wines. And if you're already a wine drinker, it's a great way to support my work. Also, you can go to twinenginecoffee.com/Alice and get some USDA certified organic coffee. These are also high altitude from Nicaragua. The company is a small family owned company. They have all the jobs are kept right there. They grow, harvest roasted beans all locally in Nicaragua. There's light roast, there's dark roast, there's also a Caturra tea. I'm drinking this right now. This is the black edition. It's very good, very smooth, darker roast. But I also like the Caturra tea, which is right here. It's like a black tea. It's the tea you make from coffee fruit, from the fruit that goes around the coffee bean. So those are my sponsors. They keep me in business. Thanks again. Okay, so let's go back to that question, Stacey. It was kind of a big one.
Big
but I
question.
guess,
Yeah.
did you understand? You want me to try to simplify it a little bit?
I mean, I had brought up lots of things for me. So I guess I'll just say a few of those things and then you can ask me again if I missed part of it. Okay. But on the baby formula, I mean, been wanting to do an investigation into baby formula for a long time because there's so much there and it's very confusing about why isn't goat's milk based formula allowed, because it is better. And I actually made my own when I had my son, who's adopted, so I couldn't breastfeed, which is a whole nother topic, but it was a goat's milk based formula. And it wasn't easy, but I think, yeah, I will just leave that there. But I will say that to your question about how do they influence policy, I mean, in so many ways are companies influencing policy and using groups like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, as well as many other groups and academies, to sort of push their talking points. One example is just around obesity. Obesity is a huge health problem. It's linked to all sorts of serious health problems that we all know people who are dealing with. We often hear advice from government programs, often government-sponsored programs, company-sponsored programs, that we all just need to exercise more. If we all exercise more, then obesity wouldn't be as much of a problem. It's personal responsibility. It should be personal shame if people are dealing with obesity. Well, we think we need to be having a public discussion about how to rein in these greedy corporations that are pushing junk food, pushing addictive junk food. We know it's addictive, intended to be addictive. It's harmful to health in many ways. The science is so clear on that. Diabetes, cardiac problems, cancers, early death, all linked to ultra-processed foods. But rather than limiting soda consumption, rather than taxing the soda industry, rather than restricting pesticides, for example, companies are just in so many ways influencing, stopping public health regulations that could save lives. And they know that people don't really trust them as the messengers of that message. And so they work through third parties like the Academy of Nutrition, and many others. I mean, we see in our research university professors straight up paid by food and pesticide companies that claim to be independent and public, influencing policy, influencing, often quoted in media as independent sources.
Speaking of university professors, are you familiar with Dr. Peter Hotez?
I have heard
Ring a bell?
that. I don't really know him.
So I'll give you just a brief update. He is a vaccine scientist slash professor. He's at Baylor University. He's been on Joe Rogan's show a bunch, and he is very extreme about I feel like if he could be reincarnated as a vaccine, he would. I just think that he could come back to, after he dies, he could come back to Earth as a vaccine. I think he would choose that. And so he's been very vocal about how people who didn't want to get the COVID vaccine or questioning vaccines should essentially be surveilled. Frankly, he calls it anti-vaccine or anti-science aggression, and that we should use the terrorism surveillance agencies, counterterrorism surveillance agencies in the United States to track this kind of communication. So he's very, very extreme on that particular topic. And I think, there have been public health professionals who said that goes too far, Peter, rein him in. But he recently was kind of going viral because he was on Rogan's show again, and he kind of was joking about the fact that he's a junk foodaholic. That's what he called himself. People were like, he just eats a burger every once in a while and you're calling him a junk foodaholic? No, he called himself a junk foodaholic. He said he eats junk food all the time. And he was laughing about it because Rogan kept saying, well, that seems terrible for a public health professional. And he's like, ha, 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 yeah, whatever. And so you have this guy who the hypocrisy that was being pointed out was you have this person who is very influential, is on all the, major sort of neoliberal, I guess, news outlets all the time, pimping vaccines. A strong proponent of surveillance of people who were questioning the COVID vaccine. And yet he's joking about the fact that he eats junk food all the time when, one of the things we learned about COVID anyway, that the public health institutions were saying was that your inflammatory response, obesity, chronic disease, diabetes, these kind of things made you far more likely to have a negative reaction. And so then, I do a video about it and he sees it and wishes me a lifetime of Cool Ranch Doritos and just was very flippant about it and doesn't understand why anyone cares. And so I tell you this because that's just one person, but I'm assuming that and the way he looks at this is very similar to probably how a lot of these people in the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics looks at, because I'm thinking they probably all sleep pretty well at night. Somehow they're in their brains, they're able to say that they take all this money from these big food corporations and they do still somehow do science and public health. That's good. How they hold these two, because he does, he thought it was just nuts that anyone cared that he said he's a junk foodaholic while he's also this vaccine extremist. He doesn't see anything wrong with that. And I have a feeling a lot of these people probably don't either. How do you think they hold these things in tension in their own minds, I guess? How do they go to work every day is my question.
Well, I think some of these guys, and I know the type, I don't know him, but they're very self-assured about their point of view, and they're very extremist in how they talk about science. There's no nuance involved. And the commonality is often anything that doesn't curtail corporate products is pro-science. So for example, you're pro-science if you love genetically engineered foods, but you're anti-science if you question. Some of these guys will also pitch for the tobacco industry, right? So the commonality is often the corporate sponsorship, or just this sort of freedom means our freedom to buy anything that a company sells us. Doesn't translate to freedom to know what's in that or what we're doing to our health. So yeah, I think anyone who's out there with this sort of annihilate and attack critics is often another part of the tactic. There's some real bullies out in front of the food and pesticide company science denial campaigns. That's what I call them, as science denialists.
Would you like to respond to this? Because I get this every time I do a food topic. I'm all for healthier food, but we were able to feed more with the food that's not as healthy. I've had farmers on that have countered that, talking about essentially, well, first off, you're subsidizing the cheap food with your health down the road. It's not cheaper. You're also subsidizing it with the environment, with all kinds of other, other issues that it may be cheap in the, immediate, but it's not cheap down the road. Also, what goes back to the regulations and whatnot. Like, does it have to be this way? Is McDonald's cheaper than going to your neighbor for a healthy or beef, alternative to McDonald's, like an actual, real beef? Is it cheaper because the system is set up so that McDonald's succeeds and my neighbor fails? However, I got to say, like, it's not, once you start getting into the local food economy, it's not as expensive as a lot of people would think. You're right. If you go to Whole Foods, it's really expensive. And a lot of that, I think, is a marketing scheme anyway. But yeah. I always tell people, if you want advice on how to eat well on a budget, please email me, AllisonMorrowMedia@protonmail.com. I'm happy to do that. I have to squeeze a budget every month for our family, and we eat very healthy. So if you're having a hard time, please email me, AllisonMorrowMedia@protonmail.com, and I'll help you out with it. What's your response to that, Stacy?
My response is that small farmers are feeding the world. 80% of the food is coming from small farmers. And the reason for that is, even though we have huge, large farms, and most of the Midwest of the US is huge monoculture corn and soy crops that are GMO, they're grown to resist and survive pesticides, needing increasing amounts of pesticides, huge amounts of fertilizer to make the soil keep growing this stuff. And most of that food, it's not food, it's going to cars for biofuel, it's going to cows as feed, and it goes to ultra-processed food factories, not food to feed people. So the fact that it's cheaper or seems cheaper, a lot of this packaged processed foods is not cheaper. It's going to be cheaper to buy an apple than an applesauce, right? For example, just better to shop around the perimeters of the supermarket, as some people say, drink water instead of soda. In a lot of ways, it's just not cheaper. But it certainly has a lot to do with subsidies and the way the whole food system is set up. And so I think we do need public solutions to these problems. We need government solutions. Because the market that we're dealing with is not free as it is. It's being subsidized in huge amounts. Farmers being subsidized to grow corn and soy. How can we shift these public monies to go to growing diverse nutritional foods that are good for our health?
What if the counter to that, because I hear this a lot, is why would we want the government to come in and fix what they already screwed up?
Well, they can at least stop screwing up what they're screwing up first.
So maybe we need them to do less.
Yes, I think the government certainly has a role also in transparency and making things more clear and making information more available. So I think there are lots of policies that, even if we don't agree on politics, that a lot of people could agree with. And in any case, the government is putting their finger on the scale, so it might as well be in a better direction.
All right, I want to get some questions.
Look at how can we help farmers transition, because I know it's not easy for a farmer who's been growing soy and corn and has depleted soil and the runoffs associated with pesticides and fertilizers and all those problems. It's not easy to change. It takes time to change. You need to provide a bridge. And I think we do need to move to a system of locally grown food, diverse, nutritious crops. And we have, where I live in Northern California, and we're very lucky to have a lot of farms and great farmers markets. And it's not really more expensive also if I shop there, because the food lasts longer, for one thing, the fruits and vegetables, buying from local farmers, and it's not that expensive, especially if you go right at the end when all the deals come up. So yeah, we moms know how to work it right to get to not spend so much.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do more work on your end from the standpoint of research and just effort to get to know what's around you and who's producing what. And on one hand, it forces you out of the house to a real person who you can have a real relationship with, instead of just going into a big box store and buying something that you don't even know really where it came from. You could say it's the best thing out there for you, but you don't really know. And most places, a lot of places, there are farms you can actually physically go visit. You go see the animals for themselves, or the produce for itself. My dad's a doctor and talks a lot about value, and the value you would get from an egg from a pastured chicken, for instance, is, it's okay. The egg's going to be a little bit more expensive, but you'll get 7 times the value because it's 7
Mm,
times more nutritious if you're looking at what's in the egg, for instance, because of the life that the chicken's had and the feed that it's eaten, that kind of thing. So you're not getting a good value. Maybe a $2 hamburger, but it's not a good value from a nutrition standpoint. Okay, let's go over to locals, AllisonMarrow.locals.com. You can be part of my editorial board. There's a live chat going where Lord Loser says, wait, she's saying that foundations can be bought? I'm shocked, I tell you. But we do have some
no,
it's crazy.
Well, I do think more that it's really becoming so much more increasingly obvious, and that's a positive thing that people understand how much influence companies are having about what we hear and see about nutrition advice, and getting advice from people like you, Allison, and online from communities that we can trust, of often moms who figured out how to do this for our families.
Yeah, and just sharing that we're here to help each other out. It does take, like, I'm not trying to pretend like it doesn't take extra work. It does. I mean, it does, but it's to me, it comes with far greater return because not only do I feel like I'm not like nervous when I hear about food shortages on the horizon or anything like that. I also I just enjoy the people. They've become almost like family to us, the people who we buy our food from, and that's that to me is also just like the great sort of unexpected result of changing the way that we eat is the relationship, which changes so many other things too. And I think it's not just food. You could see that pattern in many different areas of our lives and economies where we have fewer relationships, and because of that, the product ends up, in my opinion, getting worse. Just because we're not invested in it anymore, and we're just unhappy. It's like there's just less contentment, I think, from our standpoint, because we're losing the relationships that used to be based in an economy. Like if you 150 years ago, you had no other option. You didn't have Amazon or even grocery stores. You had to buy from a neighbor. You had all kinds of relationships based on just being able to live and feed your family and that kind of thing. And we've lost a lot of that. So I don't know. I'm a big advocate for that. Okay, let me get to a couple of these questions over at AllisonMarrow.locals.com. As it seems, most, if not all, of these associations that are supposed to safeguard our health are very compromised. What do you think is the original reasoning for indoctrinating people to think they are supposed to consume the foods that are causing their health to deteriorate? And the couple answers that named user comes up with: ignorance or incompetence, to make it possible to sustain a larger population, a way to suppress and disable the population, a way to make more money off of cheap raw materials, synergetic way to increase the amount of resources that can be squeezed out of the public through food, medicine, and healthcare. Any thoughts?
I think the last 2 points really resonate. I think it's a way to make more money. I mean, just period, first stop. It's a way to make money. And the entire industrial processed food system, from growing huge monocultures saturated with pesticides of corn and soy, and then making those into processed foods that are packaged and flashy and expensive for the nutrition that you get out of them. I think that's an important way to look at it. Companies are making lots of money, and so they're doubling down on that, and they're just going to keep going. I think we're also seeing, of course, incredible concentration of power in these industries. For example, now just 4 pesticide companies own most of the seeds and pesticides in the world. And the food companies are consolidated. And honestly, the way I see it is this is a consolidation of the most corrupt companies have sort of won their markets. And so companies that were willing to shortcut and ignore science and screw consumers, whatever. I think this is happening in every industry. So our choices are limited. And yeah, it's a way to keep making money. And I think there was one other thing the commenter pointed out, the synergy between industries. I mean, a lot of people, there's profit to be made from people eat bad food, they get sick, they need pharmaceuticals. And some companies are making money off of all those, impacts of our industrial food system. So, yeah, getting back to basics with food, eating simple food, and figuring out how we can have local economies of food, I think is really important. But it's a big shift.
Okay, part of my understanding is two major factors. Ansel Keys did poor research and was very forceful in putting his point of view forth and actively working to suppress other studies. But he drove these high carb, low fat recommendations. To during the Cold War, Nixon wanted to beat the Russians, and so he sold a lot of USA wheat to them. He started grain subsidies, and companies had to use all this extra grain. Do you work with the Nutrition Coalition? And of course, any other comments? Okay, so a couple questions there.
No, on the Nutrition Coalition. On the first point, yeah, the high carb, low fat recommendations for so many years. That's really a good example of like the entire nutrition community was all about high carb, low fat. And then we had all the, diet products and margarine and so forth and whatever. And now it's like, oh, no, that was wrong. It's the opposite. High fat, low carb is better. A lot of the science itself is compromised. And that's what we see in our research too. Food companies influencing the outcomes of food studies. And often studies are being done from the beginning to come out with certain PR narratives. So we do have to be good sleuths of science as well. And what was the second question there? I can't,
The
I don't know about that. I do think that, around World War II and then in the later decades, we really is when the chemical industry came to be such an important part of the economy. And, now we've got a food system dependent on chemicals, but we did manage to feed the human population before that. I don't think it's a matter of how many people, but how resources are allocated.
The centralization is a real problem.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with named user. Everyone in these positions definitely compromised. When did it happen? Has it been a slow progression, or is everyone just seeing the emperor's new clothes, even though his ASS is a naked to fit in?
Oh boy, I think it is getting worse. In a sense, I think it's always been this way, business as usual. We could certainly see more of it. And I think transparency and the new day of transparency, where now we can get documents and we can share them online. We can have millions of people reading company documents they thought would always be secret, is making a big difference. I do think that's waking people up and opening our eyes to what has been there all along. It's a revolving door of corruption, really. That's what we see at groups like the Academy of Nutrition. Their board members are, also involved in corporations. Everybody's having a good time, making good money off of a system that's making people sick. But we have this advantage that we can see it and talk about it. And that's why we at US Right to Know work on transparency and getting a hold of documents and just putting them out in the public so we can see what's really going on.
How concerned should we be that our beef and milk cattle may soon be vaccinated with gene therapy mRNA? What about our food crops being sprayed with it?
Yeah, I think that the new genetic engineering techniques are seriously concerning. And that there is an RNA pesticide spray, for example, that you spray on crops and then it will change the genes of these plants. To what effect? And and then what? What happens? They have no idea. I think that science has, superseded our ability to be able to deal with it consciously and morally. And genetic engineering is just a very good example. It has a long history of failure in poor communities. It's used here in the US to survive pesticide spraying, which has just created super weeds and super bugs, and they need more pesticides. So there's a lot of concerns around these new technologies, biotech, and that goes also for scientists working with dangerous pathogens. And we work on that too. Where did COVID come from? What kind of safety protocols are at these labs where scientists are tinkering with dangerous pathogens to make them more infectable? And who's watching out for what they're doing, what the consequences are, and making sure that it's safe? Big problem.
Okay. How can we stop the globalists from stealing nature and cloning it? Also, this I think needs a discussion at some point. They are already coming for the herbalists. Codex Alimentarius, a serious threat to your health. Trade commission created by the UN in attempt to control all aspects of how food and nutritional supplements are exchanged through buyer and consumer networks. I have not heard of this. Even though the UN claims that the goals of Codex Alimentarius are geared towards, quote, protecting the health of the consumers and ensuring fair trade practices in the food trade, promoting coordination of all food standards, work undertaken by international governmental and non-governmental organizations, end quote, it is clear this organization is more about control and multinational profits than protecting the average consumer. You know, I'll just real fast say, kind of going back to what I was asking about the way that there a lot, I truly believe that the most of the people that are communicating with these big food organizations, with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, somehow have done mental gymnastics to feel okay with it. I have not met many people engaged in this, and that, my background in corporate news, journalists, for instance, who lots of people say, well, you're paid by big pharma, so of course you're going to say this, but I've never met a journalist who knows A but says B because they're paid by big pharma. They're true believers in the big pharma message. That's why they spread it. And to me, that's more problematic than just getting paid. If somebody's just getting paid and they knew the truth, that's easier to deal with, right? That's just a money problem. That's not a values, integrity, ideological issue, which is much, in my opinion, harder to contend with. And so a lot of these organizations, or these movements, are done in the name of benevolence. And if in this case, it sounds like it's kind of the same deal, like the UN. Well, we're just trying to feed people, we're just trying to end hunger. Like, what's wrong with you people? You just want people to die of starvation. And so I think, there's a lot of, I don't know if you've heard of this Codex Alimentarius.
Yeah. Yes, I'm familiar with it. And I think, I agree with you that I think that the world, it's hard to see the water you're swimming in. And so groups like the UN, think they're doing good, in some cases are doing good, but we do see that increasing moves for corporate control, increasing centralized power, increasing, into a smaller number of hands that are pushing harder. Why? Because we live in a system where companies have to keep making increasing more and more profits. They can't just make the same amount. They have to make more and more. So where does more come from? So I do think we talked earlier, is this new? I think it's getting worse. I think it is getting worse at the UN level. We certainly saw with the Food Systems Summit was completely taken over by corporations and foundations like the Gates Foundation and other entities that have vested interests in continuing an industrial food system. And what's concerning about that, I think there's a lot that's concerning about it, but it's stopping our collective ability to look at true solutions, because the solutions that these groups want to talk about are very narrowly defined. We need more tech, basically, more chemicals, more genetic engineering, more centralized control to feed the world, even though that system is not even currently feeding the world and many people are starving. So I think we need to be looking at different creative, people-driven solutions. And I think this is true of the US government, the UN, they're shutting out the public interest. It just, really doesn't have a whole lot of impact what the public thinks on anything to do with US politics or policy.
This is interesting. It's more of a statement than a question, but talking about hospitals influenced by the food industry rather than actual health, they are killing their patients. My husband ended up in the hospital recently fighting lymphoma. His reason for being there was because of a ruptured appendix. The nutritionist who was tracking his food intake said he wasn't eating enough calories. They tried to get him to drink Ensure. The first two ingredients are corn syrup and sugar that should not be fed to anyone, especially a cancer patient. And a quote from Wendell Berry: people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect quote, and that's a really awful experience. I mean, yeah, corn, sugar, and syrup. That's just really, I think, unfortunately, not an uncommon experience. But
yeah, they even
right.
have. Sometimes they have fast food restaurants like in the hospital, downstairs. The nutrition in hospitals is terrible.
It is. And a lot of doctors, I think you said this earlier, don't even learn about nutrition. It's just not part of the framework. It's very much, let's find the part that's very mechanical, right? Point of view. Let's find the part that's
Battlefield medicine is what I call it. It's
but
battlefield.
what we see from science is that holistic thinking is what is driving health. Like, how do we look at the microbiome and the gut, have a healthy immune system, and that eating whole and healthy foods is a powerful healing mechanism. And I think that that's another reason why a lot of people are waking up to this, is because they've had experiences like your viewer. And also we've seen people have remarkable, amazing healing experiences from the food that they eat and from taking control over that part of their lives. And you're often, unfortunately, not going to get that kind of advice from your doctor. Some good doctors out there looking at nutrition and how all things are connected, but not enough.
I wanted to, let's see here. I wanted to take this question because somebody was asking about, here we go. So here, I'm trying to find the right, okay. Somebody was asking about who to follow for good food tips. And here, I would want to know who we can follow for good food choices. I just wanted to pull up my dad's on Locals. He's a surgeon, and he got into food, everything food, probably over a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago or so, in an effort to avoid getting root canals. His dentist told him he had to get root canals. He's a surgeon. He wasn't satisfied with the answer that the dentist gave for drilling into his tooth, and so he started researching how to heal his teeth naturally, and that's where he found Weston A. Price and his books, and so he just totally transformed the way he eats and practices medicine and everything. And I encouraged him to start a Locals page, and he does a lot. We do, in case you're watching this somewhere else, even if you don't want to join as a $5 supporter over on Locals to put questions in and stuff, just join Locals for free. Either you go to join my dad at drchipabrahamson.locals.com, because he posts all kinds of stuff on healthy living, clean living, health topics. But also on my page, he joins me once a week for Dr. Dad. Like you see here, this is Dr. Dad episode 12. We talk about how we overcook a lot of our food and what happens when you heat certain specific foods, and which ones you should eat raw and consider not cooking, and the toxins that arise, all that kind of stuff. So we do one of those every Sunday. And if you want more of that kind of content, join him, drchipabrahamson.locals.com. I mean, he's my dad, so I'm biased, but I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. I can assure you he's done a ton of research. The guy reads like a book a night. So he also you can message him and ask questions and all that good stuff. But he posts lots of stuff like, plastic cutting boards versus wooden cutting boards, honey, beeswax candles, like everything, like detergents, soaps. I mean, foods, sauerkrauts, all that good stuff. So go over to drchipabrahamson.locals.com. But so that's what I would recommend. Do you have any other thoughts for who to follow?
No, I think that's great. I always think of Andrew Weil's advice to shop in the perimeters of the supermarket and just eat whole foods as much as you can. Yeah.
There are also websites, like I think it's eatwild.org. I'll look it up while you're answering this question. Because if you want to find local farms, there are websites that will help you find farmers in your area. But I'll look for that while you're answering this. Are you collaborating with Nina Tychels? Oh, somebody already asked you about that. No.
She's amazing. I'm not collaborating with her, but she's an amazing researcher and source of information about processed foods and healthier foods. Yeah, and corporate influence over foods.
Okay. Yes, this is what it is. Eatwild.com. So you can look for local, like there's a map, and it helps you find your local farmers. So I found this to be very helpful. And like, so, I live in Washington, and they have the farms and descriptions of the farms and where they are and stuff like that. I found this to be a very helpful resource.
I love that story about your dad. Like, something was wrong with his tooth and it led him down a path of nutrition, because I think that is the most important thing we can do for our health is what we eat. And so any sort of health problem needs to start by looking there.
Well, yeah, and he never ended up needing to have his root canals, so it worked. And what's even funnier to our discussion today is that when he went back to his dentist, and the dentist said, "Wow, I guess you don't need your root canals. What did you do?" My dad said he got a second opinion from a dead dentist, and his dentist like didn't even care to ask what he meant by that or what he did. I mean, he just was like, oh, okay, whatever. So he didn't even want to know. Okay, I want to know who knew what and when, and where we can start to hold the public health agencies accountable. I mean, I don't know if, you know.
Yeah. I mean, we spend a lot of time trying to answer that question. Who knew what and when? And so, you know, for the investigations we've done, we post documents on our website at usrtk.org. We also donate a lot of documents to the UCSF chemical and food industries document libraries. And that's a great searchable database if you to ask like who knew what when, if you have names, if you have groups that are active in your community. Oftentimes they're showing up in the documents that we have on chemical and food industry lobbying and propaganda campaigns. And I do fact sheets on a lot of these groups too. So you can find those on our website, usrtk.org.
How do we stem the tide? Seems like the increase in WIC is basically a subsidy for big ag, and the percent of WIC SNAP are just going parabolic. Oh, and Joe Salatin, he's going to be on Wednesday next week. So great. Everybody, stay tuned. That should be an exciting stream. Oh, what did I just do? He's a hero of mine. So, I lost my, there's Eat Wild. Okay. Anyway, there, I went to that person's page. So yeah. So what do you think about, the WIC stuff? Any thoughts on that?
I mean,
you were talking about
the problem. Like in some cases, like junk foods are subsidized, but whole foods are more difficult to get. And also, I think we have to mention that not every community is like mine or yours, where we have access to local, fresh, healthy foods. And there's a lot of food deserts in this country where people have convenience stores, you know, to go food shopping, and that's it. Yeah. So these are problems that need policy. We can't fix them as individuals. We need governments to step up. So somebody like Joel for Secretary of Ag, I would be for it. I still, while, you know, there's a lot of reason to distrust what government programs are doing, we also need them. So I'm
going to ask him about that question, because I think that would probably be the last job he would ever want.
Yeah, right.
It is worth just this comment from Davina's King, Dr. Sam Bailey. She's been on before with her husband, Mark, Kaufman, Terrain Theory, Dr. Cowan, Tom Cowan. That's, you know, those doctors are worth looking into too. It's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, but definitely if you're interested in, you know, in doctors who even question sort of the germ theory side of the health narrative, it's worth exploring some of the ideas that they bring up, because they look at the immune system more as like a repair system, not the way that I think doctors are traditionally taught, which is it's battling these
invaders.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
that's an interesting perspective. I think the key thing is, and a lot of your readers have probably already gotten to this point, but realizing that we have to take it upon ourselves to do the research, to figure out who to trust, and not just like you go to your annual at your doctor and they're going to give you the information that you need to live a healthy life. And unfortunately, it's not for your children either. Like, we have to do the research and figure out who we can trust and find information on our own. And it's harder than it should need to be.
Yeah. I feel like this is a good, this is funny. This is a good ending here. Scuba Jim says, remember in stores, they have a health food area in the grocery store. What is all the other food?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good point. Okay, Stacy Malkan, thank you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up? Just a, you know, heads up again, you're with US Right to Know, so people can go to your website, usrtk.org. You can read all the documents that we were talking about today. Any final closing thoughts?
We also have a weekly newsletter. I encourage folks to sign up. We send around the best public health news from reputable publications, and also breaking news from our investigations. And we're looking at pesticide and food companies, what they're up to behind the scenes, and also the biotech industry, origins of COVID, strange, disturbing research on dangerous pathogens, and other things that we just generally have a right to know and need to be sharing this information so that we can all be well informed to make the best choices for our families. And thank you for the work that you do, educating everyone about what's up.
My pleasure. I appreciate it, Stacy. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.